The journals from that year describe it the same way, no matter where they were written. The sun had changed. It rose each morning. It crossed the sky. It set each evening. But something was wrong. People called it pale, weak, colorless. A sun that gave light but no warmth. A sun that felt distant, as though the world had been moved farther from it during the night. In June of 1816, snow fell across New England. Frost killed crops in Pennsylvania, New York, and Vermont. Farmers who had worked the same land for generations stood in their fields and did not understand what they were seeing. This was not a late spring. This was not an early autumn. This was something that had no name. Across the Atlantic, the same confusion spread. In France, in Germany, in the Swiss valleys, summer never arrived. Wheat rotted in the ground. Livestock starved. Riots broke out in cities where bread had become more valuable than gold. In the mountains of Central Asia, harvests failed. In the Russian territories, famine spread. In China, floods destroyed what cold had not. The entire Northern Hemisphere had entered a season that should not exist. History calls it the year without a summer, a climate anomaly, a consequence of ash and sulfur in the atmosphere. But those who lived through it called it something else, the year the sun died. When sunlight weakens, it is not just crops that suffer, it is the human mind. People depend on the rhythm of seasons, planting in spring, harvesting in autumn, the reliability of warmth, of cold, of light. These are the structures around which civilizations organize themselves. But in 1816, those structures collapsed. Farmers planted in May, as they always had. By June, the seeds had frozen in the ground. They planted again in July. Frost came again in August. There was no pattern, no predictability, no way to adapt. The sun rose, but it did not warm. The sky was often overcast, but even on clear days, the light felt wrong. Eyewitness accounts describe it as gray, as filtered, as though seen through cloth. One French observer wrote that the sun appeared as though seen through smoke, though there were no fires. An American farmer described it as a cold light, like the light of the moon. A German journal recorded that the heavens had become foreign. These descriptions appear independently across continents. People who had no contact with one another used the same words to describe the same experience. The sky had changed, and no one knew why. The failure was not regional. That is what makes it distinct from other famines, other disasters, other cold periods in history. Cold winters were common, droughts were understood. Even plagues, as devastating as they were, followed recognizable patterns of spread and containment. But 1816 was different. In North America, crops failed from Canada to the Carolinas. In Europe, famine stretched from Ireland to Poland. In Asia, records describe simultaneous harvest failures across regions separated by thousands of miles. The timing was synchronized. This was not a drought moving across trade routes. This was not cold spreading slowly from the poles. This was a collapse that arrived everywhere at once, as though something in the atmosphere itself had fundamentally changed. Ships crossing the Atlantic reported strange skies. Sailors described sunsets that lingered too long in colors that should not appear in nature: red, brown, purple. Skies that felt oppressive, that weighed on the mind. The official explanation is well established. In April of 1815, Mount Tambora in Indonesia erupted with a force that ejected vast quantities of ash and sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere. This material spread globally, blocking sunlight and lowering temperatures. Volcanic winters are real. Ice core data supports this explanation. Climate models confirm that eruptions of this magnitude can cause temporary global cooling. The science is credible, the mechanism is sound, and yet, volcanic winters are supposed to last 1 to 2 years. They are supposed to cause cooling, reduced sunlight, and disrupted weather patterns. But the human records describe something more prolonged, more severe, more destabilizing. They describe not just cold, but wrongness, not just crop failure, but a fundamental break in how the world functioned. They describe populations that did not recover, communities that dissolved, knowledge systems that vanished. If this was only a volcanic winter, why did the recovery look like this? In the years following 1816, populations shifted in ways that are difficult to explain. Census records from the 1820s show gaps, missing people, missing families. Entire villages that had existed for centuries simply stopped appearing in tax rolls, in church records, in legal documents. Orphanages across Europe and North America filled beyond capacity, not just in 1817 or 1818, but throughout the 1820s. Poorhouses expanded, asylums were built at a rate never seen before. Who were these people? Where had they come from? Why were there so many of them? Historical records provide numbers but few names. They provide structures but little narrative. They document the institutions built to contain the displaced, but not the stories of displacement itself. Farms were abandoned, not just failed farms, productive farms, estates that had supported families for generations. Land that had been cultivated, irrigated, and maintained simply stopped being worked. By the 1830s, new settlers were moving into regions that had once been densely populated. They found stone foundations, wells, roads, evidence of previous habitation, but the people were gone, and the records did not explain where they had gone or why. On maps from the 18th century, the name Tartaria appears frequently. It is printed across vast regions of Central Asia. It appears on Russian maps, French maps, British maps. The term was used to describe territories that were not well understood by European cartographers. Sometimes it referred to Mongol or Turkic peoples. Sometimes it was simply a placeholder for unknown lands. But by the mid-19th century, the name begins to disappear. Not slowly, rapidly. Maps from the 1820s still show it. Maps from the 1850s do not. The regions themselves did not vanish. The geography remained, but the label changed. The political structures changed. The populations changed. Why? Standard history explains this as political reorganization. The Russian Empire expanded. New treaties were signed. Modern cartography replaced older, less accurate systems. This is true. It is documented, but the timing is striking. The disappearance of Tartaria from maps coincides almost exactly with the period following 1816, the same period when orphan populations surged, when settlements were abandoned, when records became fragmented. This does not prove causation. Coincidence is not evidence, but it invites questions. What happened in those regions during the years when the sun dimmed? What happened to the populations that had lived there? Why do records from this period become sparse, incomplete, or contradictory? These are not fringe questions. They are gaps acknowledged even by mainstream historians, but they are rarely explored together. The world that emerged in the decades after 1816 was architecturally different from the one before it. Older styles of construction, ornate stonework, massive civic buildings, intricate detailing began to decline. Simpler designs became standard. Industrial methods replaced traditional craftsmanship. This shift is usually attributed to industrialization, to new technologies, to economic pressures, but the speed of the transition is unusual. Within a single generation, building techniques that had been practiced for centuries were abandoned. Guilds dissolved, apprenticeship systems collapsed. Knowledge that had been passed from master to student for hundreds of years simply stopped being transmitted. By the 1850s, architects and engineers were designing buildings with no reference to older methods, not because those methods were inferior, but because the people who knew them were gone. This is treated as progress, as modernization, but it is also loss. The institutions that arose in the 1820s and 1830s were different in character from those that had existed before. They were larger, more centralized, more focused on control than on community. Poorhouses became mandatory. Asylums expanded to house not just the mentally ill, but anyone deemed unable to function within the new social order.
Orphanages took in children whose parents were listed as unknown, untraceable, or dead under circumstances that were never fully explained. Governments gained new powers during this period. Emergency measures enacted during the famine years became permanent. Systems of registration, documentation, and surveillance that had not existed before became standard. This is often framed as administrative progress, as the birth of the modern state, but it is also the birth of a system designed to manage displacement on a massive scale. What was lost in 1816 was not just crops, not just lives, it was continuity. Civilizations are built on continuity, on the transmission of knowledge from one generation to the next, on the preservation of stories, techniques, traditions. When that continuity is broken, even if people survive, something dies.
Craftsmanship dies, not because the tools are lost, but because the teachers are gone. Language dies, not because people stop speaking, but because the context in which certain words had meaning no longer exists. Memory dies, not because it is erased, but because there is no one left to whom it can be passed. In the decades following 1816, entire cultural systems disappeared, not through conquest, not through deliberate destruction, through silence. By the time the climate stabilized, the world had moved on. The people who might have remembered how things had been were dead, or displaced, or too few to sustain the old ways. And so the knowledge simply stopped. Volcanic winters cause cooling, they disrupt harvests, they create famine, but they do not usually cause the kind of social collapse seen after 1816. They do not usually result in mass abandonment of settlements. They do not usually produce generations of orphans with no clear origin. They do not usually coincide with the disappearance of entire cultural labels from maps. Other volcanic events in history, Krakatoa in 1883, Pinatubo in 1991, caused temporary disruptions, cooling, crop failures, but recovery followed known patterns. Populations rebuilt, communities persisted. 1816 was different. Recovery was slower, more uneven, and in some regions it did not happen at all. Why? If the cause was volcanic ash, why did some areas collapse entirely while others recovered within a few years? If the disruption was only environmental, why did social structures disintegrate so completely? If this was a natural disaster, why do the patterns of recovery look more like the aftermath of war? These questions do not have simple answers, and perhaps that is the point. Perhaps the event itself was more complex than a single cause can explain. Perhaps what happened in 1816 was not one disaster, but a convergence, environmental collapse, social fragility, political instability, all arriving at the same moment. And perhaps the world that existed before that convergence was more fragile than anyone realized. The year 1816 is documented, it is studied, it appears in climate research, agricultural history, economic analysis, but it is not remembered as a boundary. It is remembered as an anomaly, a bad year, a footnote. Yet everything after it was different. The maps were different, the institutions were different, the architecture was different, the populations were different, and the stories, those that survived, were different too. Older narratives, older ways of understanding the world began to fade, not because they were disproven, but because the people who carried them were gone. By the mid-19th century, the world had been reorganized, new borders, new nations, new systems of power, and the world that existed before 1816, whatever it had been, was no longer accessible. Not because it had been destroyed, because it had been forgotten. History is not erased, it fragments, it scatters, it becomes difficult to reconstruct, and eventually it becomes easier to accept the simplified version than to ask why the full story is missing. The sun returned, summers came again, crops grew, but the world that emerged under that sun was not the world that had existed before. It was smaller, quieter, more controlled, and whatever had been lost in those cold, dim years, whether it was knowledge, culture, memory, or something deeper, was never fully recovered. 1816 was not just a year without a summer, it was a year without a past. And we are still living in the world that began when the old one ended.